Okay, so we got people coming into the room right now. Welcome everyone. We're gonna get started in just a moment. We're expecting a fairly good crowd today, so we just want to give it a minute to let everyone come on in. So, many of you have been here before. I'm seeing some familiar names popping up. So I'm going to get started. I'm Lauren Traster. I am the 4-H Teen and Leadership Program Coordinator here at UVM Extension, and I facilitate the Teen Science Cafes. I see some of you, Simon and Jack and Eva, great to see you guys. So if you're new to this, what we'd like you to do is open up your chat box and please introduce yourselves. We love to know who's here and especially where everyone's from, because we know that you're coming from all over Vermont as well as all over the country. So it's really fun to see where everyone is coming from today. I'm going to ask Allison to pop into the chat box right now. If you do need our closed captioning services today, just click on the link that Allison just put into the chat box. And that will get you to the live captioning so you can follow along. So welcome everyone. I love to see so many of you are back again. I'm recognizing so many of you, and I know some of you are new today, so this is great. So I am going to just go and review our protocols for being here in Zoom land for our Teen Science Cafe. I want to remind you all that everyone is muted. You don't have the ability to speak, but you do have the ability to share your thoughts in 2 different ways. So we have a chat box, which you all are using right now. And the chat box is going to be used for when our presenter might ask you a question, to give feedback, respond to her questions, or if you have a thought or idea that's related to today's topic. We don't use the chat box for side conversations or to be off topic. We really do try to stay on topic and just create a nice learning environment for everyone. We also have a Q&A box, and our Q&A box is specifically for your questions that you want to ask our presenter today. And so you're going to, when a question pops into your mind, be specific with your question, because it might be, in relation to a specific slide, but your question may not get addressed, till the end of the presentation. So make sure we know specifically what you're referring to and what you're asking. You'll see in the Q&A box, there's a thumbs up. That means you can upvote a question if someone asked a question you like, or maybe the same question. But even if the questions get upvoted, every question is going to get answered today. That's the beauty of our cafes. You ask the questions and our presenter is going to share her knowledge and wisdom with you. So we ask that you be courteous, just, no distractions. And again, usually that means the chat box. So just stay focused there, stay engaged, participate fully. I know today's topic is going to be very interesting. I do want to share some other opportunities like I do every week. You can find more information about these opportunities at the website listed below. But coming up next week, we're going to kick off the Youth Environmental Summit. So if you are interested in environmental issues, I would strongly recommend you look to do that. It's on your own time. You don't have to show up at any specific date or time. It's all asynchronous, and you can come in and out of the summit anytime you want for a 3-week period. So I encourage you to check that out. We have more science cafes every week. We have a speak up contest where you win some money. Same with the Youth Environmental Summit. We're having a scavenger hunt with a raffle, so you could actually win some money. So if that's your incentive, come on in. And we're still looking for teen teachers for our Try for the Environment program. Again, you can learn about these programs at the website listed. If you are interested in neuroscience, our friends at the Vermont Brain Bee are doing weekly sessions to build your skills and knowledge around neuroscience. And you can learn about their program at the vermontbrainbee.com. I know they have some really interesting presenters and just, it goes deep. So if you do want to learn about the brain, go check that out. Our friends at the Lake Champlain Sea Grant do their own teen science cafes that they call Zoom a Scientist. Actually, it's not a teen science cafe because they're open to everyone, but they have a couple coming up. So that's based on watershed science. And then our friends in Maine also do a teen science cafe. So you can learn more about those. I know Allison's going to be popping the links in there. So you all, those of you who've been here before have never heard me refer to anyone named Allison before. And I just want you all to know, I have to leave early today. I am having a family emergency that I have to deal with. So I'm going to be leaving probably in about 20, 30 minutes, if not sooner. And Allison's going to be taking over the moderating. So you'll hear her asking the questions, or if you put answers in the chat box, you'll hear her voice. So I do just want to introduce her. Allison, if you just want to say a quick hello.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to help moderate your questions and see what questions you have for our presenter today.
Great, thank you. So let's get to today's presentation. We have our topic, how does our nervous system confer different reactions? Oh my goodness, I can't read the rest of it because Allison's picture is over that. So hang on a second. How does our nervous system confer different reactions to stress? Our presenter is Cheaito, and I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about her. Aya is a pre-doctoral clinician with New England survivors of torture and trauma. She is originally from Beirut, Lebanon, and has studied neuroscience at New York University. She is now a second-year clinical psychology student at the University of Vermont, focusing on trauma and understandings of race and discrimination. And in her free time, Aya likes to play guitar and draw. So let's welcome Aya to our teen science community. We're really excited to have you with us today and are excited to learn from you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Okay. Some reason. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to play this. And I'm just going to put on the chat. Okay, great. Hopefully everybody can see this. So hello, everyone. And thank you, Lauren, for this introduction. I want to make this talk as interactive as possible, and I have some questions kind of like weaved throughout the talk. And I'm hoping to give kind of a broad and general understanding of how our body and our environments interact and how that can be related to our mental health. So please feel free to, type up questions when I invite you all to reflect on things, because, I'm really interested in hearing what your thoughts are on the topic. So a little about me, as Lauren said, I'm from Lebanon, Beirut. It's like this very little country on the map. I studied neuroscience at NYU, and then I worked in psychiatry at Brown University, and I currently work with the New England survivors of torture and trauma at UVM. My research is very focused on how our physiology interacts with the environment and how that can affect mental health, such problems such as depression or anxiety or trauma, etc. I also work with another lab that looks at how our brain will process information differently when the environment has a lot of stressors. So for example, if someone's really discriminated against or experiences of trauma, how that can really make some changes in the brain. So my agenda for today, I'd like to first start talking about a little bit about mental health. It's going to be kind of an open discussion, what it is, trying to define that. Second, we're going to talk about stress. What are some of the stressors that we'll talk about today? And I'm going to present broadly on some theories on stress and the environment. Hopefully, I'm going to try to do this as simply as possible without using much jargon. It's very hard when we're in academia and we're always using the same jargons. And finally, I want to talk about how different ways the body can react to stress. Okay. Same messages. Okay. So, first off, I wanted to talk about how do we take care of our mental health and our bodies, and kind of like talking about what mental health is. Any ideas or, any discussion questions about what do you think is mental health? What does it mean for you? Feel free to type that in the chat box, just so I can hear what folks think.
There's always a slight delay as they're typing, but I know it will be coming because we always have such a great engaged group here. While they're typing, I didn't know you had a Brown University connection. That is where I went. So Klaus says it gives me my own world. Emily says stress. Jack, or it could be Simon. Oh, it is Simon speaking. It is the things like madness. And Lily says mental health is what you think in your brain and also how it runs. And Eva says mental health means to me being able to make good decisions and be happy and process feelings well. And Oliver says the mental well-being of yourself. Brian says the state that your emotions are in. Anna says emotional and physical well-being. Oliver also says being happy, and Mariah says like emotions, ? And Katie says your mental state. Wow, you guys.
Those are incredible responses, and they all tap into the same thing. So you're all correct. It does really, mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. So it is considered as a part of our health, right? And how we respond to different stressors in life, whether we cope with them in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way, is also a part of our health. It also relates to how we make choices. Mental health is considered important at every stage of life, from childhood through adolescence through adulthood. And I have a picture here showing that, mental health really affects thoughts, feelings, and behavior, right? So how we engage with the world is kind of a broad definition of what mental health is. And it is a part of health in general. Does that make sense, hopefully? Okay. I was wondering, before I move on, whether folks have heard the term self-care. If yes, what does it mean to you?
What do you guys think? Self-care. And that's okay. Yep. So Jack hasn't heard that before. And that's fine. Some of you haven't. Sage says to not beat yourself up. And Mariah says taking care of yourself. Same, Anna says the same thing. And now they're coming in fast and furious. Always that delay. So several have said taking care of yourself, your mind and your body, how you take care of your body, taking time to process feelings and do things to make you happy.
Excellent.
And Sydney says self-care means to take care, to nurture things in your life that bring your body and soul joy. What a great description. Brian says looking at your own feelings and how you treat yourself. And Imran says self-care is making sure that your well-being is confident. Like that. Wow. And Eva says do things for yourself. You guys have some good descriptions there.
Those are all really wonderful, the descriptions. And I really like the part where someone said, look at feelings, and that really kind of taps into us being mindful and being aware of how we feel, because that usually can help us respond better to stressors in our environment. This is just these are just examples of self-care that I found. And again, self-care is, as you all said, how we take care of our mental health when we are dealing with so much stressors, when things feel overwhelming, to avoid a lot of anxiety, to avoid depressed feelings, etc. What can we do to take care of ourselves and our body? Because mental health and physical health are very, very interrelated. So these are just examples of, how folks do things sometimes to take care of themselves. It could be physical self-care, like sleeping if you're really tired or overwhelmed, exercising. It could be, journaling if there are a lot of feelings that you want to express. It could be a social system, a social support system, meditating, praying, if that is a part of what you do, going to spiritual events or religious events, if that is something that you do or not. It could be hobbies, etc. I see here, Alice said, talk to people you love and provide support for them and let them provide support for you. That is really wonderful. So yeah, that was just a little about self-care. So we talked a little bit about what mental health and well-being is, what is self-care, what are some ways we can take care of ourselves. Now I want to talk about what is stress. And I want to talk about it more also from a biological standpoint. Again, very big question. I know everybody uses the term stress for everything. So I want to hear what you think about it before I delve into what folks in science and the literature have defined stress. Does stress cause gray hairs?
I will say firsthand, yes.
Yes. So yes, Klaus, that is an example of how our feelings can really manifest in our bodies. Emotional breakdowns. That is an example of stress. Having too much to do and not enough time to do it. Absolutely, especially now with work demands and how fast the culture is, time feels like is escaping from us all the time. Lily says stress is something you dread on and are weighed down on. Oliver says can be a cause of stress, constant anxiety, feeling overwhelmed and unable to control your surrounding. That is a big one too. Strain on your mind and emotions. Good definition. Stress is the body's response to perceived threats to our physical or mental health. I like that, Sydney. I like that. So Sydney is mentioning that it's how we perceive what stress is. Sometimes a stressor or something is happening in our environment, sometimes it's not threatening, but your mind will perceive it as threatening or stressful. Imran says stress is a negative or positive reaction of your body has to certain situations. Yes. I love what Imran said, negative or positive reaction. So it's not always negative. We'll talk about that. Klaus said when you're going nuts. Jack says when there's something that you can't do but have to. Yeah, so like when your body doesn't feel like, it has the capacity or the bandwidth to do it, but you feel like you still have to do it. That's a good way. Anna says emotional, physical reaction to feelings or situations that are overwhelming or out of control. Talking about overwhelming. Any strain, not having enough me time. Yep. So not having enough me time really goes back to this idea of self-care. So there isn't enough time for us to take care of ourselves and our bodies. Too much to deal with mentally and physically, Alice. When you get a feeling that make you hurry, I guess, from Klaus. Stress can also be constant. Without stress, you can control. Stress can be caused by ourselves. That's a good point, Eva. Or have no control over. So I'm seeing this recurrent theme of like, there are things happening, but we can't control it. And that causes us to feel stressed, to feel overwhelmed, right? Those are all incredible, incredible answers. Alice says problems of all sizes piling up and it feels like it's drowning you. I like that metaphor of drowning. It really goes back to this idea of being overwhelmed and not being able to contain things in our environment. And that is also due because sometimes the environmental demands of life are too much than our body and mind can handle. Everybody has great answers. I agree with you, Klaus. So from all of these definitions are really wonderful. And it sounds like most of you have a definition of stress that is very related to also mental health. Now, what I want to just pinpoint is that the first person who coined the term stress is, I think he's a biologist, Selye. I think it was in the 60s. I'll have to look that up again, but yeah, I think it's around maybe the 60s. And Selye is saying that our bodies are in balance just during baseline, right? So he calls this homeostasis. So when you're just sitting around, you are doing your thing, everything seems calm, everything is stable, your body is in a homeostatic state. And this means that your body is in balance. So your hormones are working well, your digestion is working well, you're breathing well, your heart rate, it has a good rate, it's not going too up or too down. So this is called the balance of our body. Now, Celia is saying anything that disrupts that biological balance is considered stress. And it can be positive or negative. So for example, if your body is at balance, and for example, you take a pill and it's a hormonal pill, and that pill is going to change the entire workings of your system and your hormones and different chemicals in your body, that is considered a stress to your body. I remember from what Imran said, he said, said that it could be a positive or negative. So a very, very positive event can actually be considered a stressor, because say you hear about something really, really that made you super happy, that's also going to cause your body to kind of like shift its balance, right? So really, stress on a mere biological standpoint is considered as anything that disrupts your body's balance. Now, this is really interesting because from all your definitions, we think about stress as something bad, right? We say in our regular just language, oh, I'm stressed out, this is so stressful. It always refers to something negative. Now, biologically speaking, according to science, yes, Klaus said, can it be good? So not all stress is bad. This is a graph, and it's really widely used in psychology, that shows your performance on the y-axis versus stress level on the x-axis. Now, if we look here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if there is very little stress, that's not cool, right? It's not fun. It's not fun to have no stress at all. It's not fun for life to be extremely monotonous, right? So we don't perform as much if we are not engaged with our environment, right? If everything is monotonous, if everything is constantly the same, it's actually not great for us. It's not great for our bodies. Now, on the flip side, if there is too much stress, we do risk a lot of negative mental health outcomes, such as, we can feel overwhelmed or burnt out or panicked or extremely angry, fatigued, or even sick, because stress does affect our physical health. Now, according to this theory, there is a moderate amount of stress that's good for each and every one of us. So it's good when stress is within limits that we can tolerate, because when it's kind of moderate, we reach our peak performance. We could perform really, really well. So think about it. If you're at work and there's just a teeny bit of stress, not too much stress, you tend to perform better. You're more motivated. You're more motivated to finish what you need to do. Klaus is saying, can it hurt you? And yeah, so again, if stress is too much, if there is a lot of stressors in the environment that are too big for you to handle, absolutely, it can hurt us. It can hurt our mental health and our physical health.
Yeah, we also have some questions coming into the chat box.
Yes.
Surrounding this. The first question was from Anna, which is stress always noticeable? I thought that was an interesting question.
Oh, I did not see that. Oh, that is such an important question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the other, oh, sorry, I'll let you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'll let you answer that question. Is stress always noticeable? And then the other question from Mariah was, so she asked, if you're bored, does that mean you have a lack of? I don't know if those two kind of go together.
Excellent questions. Wow. So for the first question, and this is, I'm going to answer this from a clinical psychology standpoint. So is stress noticeable? Not really. So sometimes folks are not aware of how stressed out they are. This can be due to a lot of different factors. Sometimes it can be due to the really fast pace of life because, you know, we live in a society where we're always running and crunching for time. So stress is not always noticeable. It depends on how much the individual feels aware of their emotions or not. So sometimes some people might say, I don't know why, but like, I just feel like this thing on my chest and I don't know why. Or like, I'm having difficulties breathing and I just feel irritable all the time, but I don't know why. So stress is not always noticeable. It really depends on how much that person is in touch with their body and their emotions and mental health, because they are really connected. And Mariah's questions about whether if you're bored, was the question if you're bored, what was it?
Her question was, if you are bored, does that mean you have a lack of stress?
So that is a very interesting question. And I'm going to also answer it from a clinical psychology standpoint, because of course it is different for every single person. But when someone feels bored, if they describe it as a complete lack of interest, that they don't feel any interest in doing anything, that they used to enjoy things before and that they're not enjoying them, that could actually be a sign of depression. So it is definitely, you know, yeah, it could mean, if I remember, was it that bored means lack of stress?
Yes. Yeah, that's what they're equating. Okay. Does bored mean lack of stress?
Mean lack of stress. So not always. And again, I do think that it does differ from person to person and how that person's temperament and personality is. But, you know, in clinical psychology, we do know that being bored a lot of the time, if that doesn't look like the person is or their temperament, that could indicate depression, which could be considered as a stressor in someone's life. Any other questions that I'm missing? Sorry, Allison.
No, you're good. This is my job to monitor the Q&A. We have a few others, but I think some of them were kind of on other topics. One that came in, and I don't know if you're going to get to this but it's how much does stress affect animals like dogs? So in other words, does stress affect, you know, are we animals in a sense?
Absolutely. Oh my God, that is a wonderful question. And the short answer is yes. So we are mammals at the end of the day. And there is a lot of scientific literature that studies the nervous system that says that the way we deal with stress, and I'll tap into this a little bit, is highly related to our nervous system. And we are mammals at the end of the day. Dogs are animals that also have a nervous system. So of course, that nervous system is going to inherently interact with the environment if it has stressors. How does stress affect the adrenal? We will talk about that. That's a great question, Jill. Birds peck out their feathers from stress. That's another example, Ava, of how animals could respond to stress. It seems like it would. Think of all the rescue dogs that have a hard time trusting people after they've been abused. That's another excellent observation, Alice. Yes. So you know, we can argue that, you know, if an animal has been abused or has had a very difficult experiences, that will show behaviorally. Yeah, and they will experience it. Anything I missed? Foxes run around where it's stressed. Yes. This is another graph that I obtained from another scientific paper that really shows how, you know, how stress trajectory happens. So on the y-axis, you see the physiologic response, which really means how our bodies react to stress. So when a stressor happens, our body's going to react, and I'll talk more about this in a bit. Our body's going to react. For example, our heart rate's going to go up. We might feel sweaty. We might feel like difficulty breathing if we're really stressed. And then what occurs naturally is that the body recovers. Slowly but surely, the body should recover. However, that doesn't happen all the time. If you are exposed to a one-time stressor, yes, of course, that happens. The stressor will allow your body to kind of respond to the stressor, and then your body's gonna recover. But what if someone is exposed to stressors like around them in the environment constantly? Do those folks have the time? Do their bodies have the time to recover? Not so much. So I wanted to kind of talk about what the scientific, this is from a paper that was written in 2011, talk about what folks define different types of stress, and you'll find different definitions across the scientific literature. So tolerable stress falls under the category of more intense short-term experiences, such as the departure of a loved one or a natural disaster. These are one-time things. They cause a tremendous amount of stress to our bodies. And then we go into this recovery phase. So hopefully we're able to recover from them. Now, stress is termed toxic when it's prolonged, when it's severe, when it's frequent. And we have the term in clinical psychology and neuroscience that's called allostatic overload, which really means the wear and tear on our bodies and brains that result from being stressed out, but stressed out really constantly. And I was wondering, does anybody have examples that you can think of what could be those stressors that can cause wear and tear on our bodies? Work and deadlines, school. Sage says abuse, absolutely. Nonstop schoolwork. Poverty, yes. Poverty is one of those chronic stressors because you don't deal with it once. You're dealing with it every single day. Homelessness, moving a lot, absolutely a constant stressor. When you're working is pulling up more and more. Fighting of parents, yes, so marital conflict can also lead to a lot of problems for children and in the family. So Alice says, in examples of toxic stress would be if LGBTQ plus person was in a homophobic environment or someone with darkened skin is around racist people a lot. That is another example, Alice, where yes, if you are different and you live in a space that doesn't accept you, that is definitely something that's going to cause wear and tear on your body, and it affects you over the long term. Jack says wounds. Lily says health issues. Friends, yes, so being in a toxic friendship around us, right? Like having a friend that's not really supportive or that's toxic or abusive, that can also cause kind of this prolonged type of stress. Anxiety, hurt family members, toxic friendship, we talked about that. Paranoia, yes, so like constant paranoia can do that. There's some studies that say we need safety to have good mental health. And in this pandemic, we don't feel like we have safety. That's another great point, Eva. Yes, this pandemic is a constant stressor, which is why side note, I want to say, please make sure you are taking care of yourselves. This is really a hard time for everybody right now. When you lose your house, says Lily, yes, you lose your house due to economic reasons, financial reasons, natural disasters can happen, bad boyfriends, yes, bills, bad girlfriends too. So what I'm hearing, the pattern is, yes, so all of these environmental factors can cause stressors for us. They can be social, as you mentioned. Some of you mentioned homelessness, poverty, being different, being either LGBTQ or of a different race, living in a non-accepting environment, so social factors, but it could also be, interpersonal factors, family members, abuse, boyfriends, girlfriends, And it could also be, of course, just of a general, a general also social nature, which, the pandemic, which is another stressor. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Thank you all so much. These are all extremely great responses. Now, a part of what I study is, I'm just going to talk quickly about it if anyone's interested, but part of what I study is online stressors. So now, because of the pandemic, our environments are shifting, right? We're not able to talk to people face to face. We're not able to be around different people. And that is really causing kind of a stress globally for the whole population. So our bodies as a collective are changing because the entire way we interact with different people is being completely butchered. So we are now interacting with each other online all the time. We are not able to kind of regulate or self-care by meeting friends or going out together, going to concerts. We are interacting with a screen, right? And that changes even our brain, and that changes our bodies too, believe it or not. So what I study is online stressors. And this is also a part of my master's thesis where I look at online environments. Can anybody tell me how an online environment can be toxic? Cyberbullying, yes. Yep. If groups, are being racist. If it is, it's dark and grim, like too much screen time, inappropriate jokes. You're addicted. Yep. So if you're addicted to online environments, constant comparison. Yes. So like comparing Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, also, there's a lot of literature that shows that that can be actually very toxic for us to consume because we're constantly comparing each other. Misinterpretation, hearing about horrid situations anyone is in, inappropriate pictures, making a fake persona online for likes, no energy from people, seeing only bad news and losing hope. Yes. So you're all giving, or strangers talk to strangers. So you're all giving good examples of how this new way we're interacting with each other can really stress us and cause stress to our bodies. And what I work on mainly is related to that. So we know from previous research that students find social media as a tool to socialize and make friendships, right? So it started off as this very good intentioned thing, right? So, we're going to connect with people we haven't talked to in a lot of time. We're going to make new friendships. It's a connection thing. But of course, we discovered that overusing it does have a dark side. We know that Twitter, for example, has 145 million monetizable daily active users. So that's a lot of people that use Twitter, but that's just one statistic. But we know that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are, the main way we're interacting right now. And that could lead to what folks have coined to cyberbullying. So cyberbullying is defined by a range of behaviors that include hostility with the intention to harm the receiver using social media. So someone can be bullied through texting, through apps, through forums, etc., through email. And just to define the term, cyber victimization, if you hear that term, it basically means being on the receiving end of cyberbullying. So it refers to being victimized or bullied through the use of social digital media. And it's considered a public health concern. So the Center for Disease and Control, which is, this big centers, it's very esteemed, and it issues a lot of health related decisions. They esteem it as a public health control. Yes, Klaus, the CDC, correct. Cyber victimization can be indirect or direct. So this can mean that someone can bully someone indirectly over forums. Like, if someone is on, I heard about, this forum called Reddit, for example, or other different forums. If someone is, bullying someone in a public thread where everybody can see it, maybe it could be visible to the person or not. That is also considered bullying. It could also be direct. So sending direct messages, direct threatening emails to someone is also considered bullying. it is characterized by a repetitive pattern. So it tends to be repetitive, and usually it tends to have a power differential. So usually the bullier tends to have more power than the person being victimized. And we know from previous research that cyber victimization affects mental health regardless of your age. So this is an issue that's going to affect children, adolescents, and adults using social media. According to the literature, it's been associated with lower self-esteem, higher anxiety, higher depression, and higher substance or drug use. So we know that it does have a negative effect on our mental health. Now, this is just, what I study, and just to give you kind of an idea, but I'm trying to study how these online stressors interact with our physiology and our nervous system, and how that can predict mental health outcomes such as depression or anxiety. But again, this is just an idea for you to have about what stressors could look like, because online environments can indeed cause stress. Now, the other kind of question, kind of discussion that I have for all of you is, and I know it's very vague and it's intended to be vague, but feel free to answer with any way that you like. How do you think the body and the environment interact? So can you give me like examples of how the body and the environment interact? And Allison, I don't know if I missed anything, but if I missed, please feel free to let me know.
Yeah, I will. There are some questions, but I'm kind of picking some that I think we can save for the end that are a little bit more general.
Great.
But I'll
Perfect.
let you know if one comes up that's like a burning question right now.
Perfect. So respiration. Okay. The greenery helps boost people's mood. Yes, Mariah. For example, the greenery is part of the environment, and it could induce a relaxing effect on our bodies. Through moving or the atmosphere that's bad. Wow, yes, that's a good one. So pollution can be a part of the environment that can affect our bodies. Showing anger against repetitive and redundant actions. Humidity gives me a headache. Yes. Shivering is a physical response to being cold. Trees cool down the areas around them. Sunlight affects our bodies, mostly, hopefully positively. Could it technically be anything? Yes, anything in the environment does affect our bodies. Your body has adaptation to the environment. Things that you like may feel you happy. Yes, Lily, absolutely. The forest gives us the happy feeling. I like that, Klaus. Yeah, so like seeing greenery and the environment around us can really induce induce our relaxation in our bodies. Fever is your body trying to burn bad bacteria. That is another good example. So if you catch something from the environment, your body's and your immune system's gonna try to fight it. Smoke from over 5 fires in my state. Yes, absolutely. I think it depends on the person, because an introvert would be calm in a nature setting, and an extrovert would enjoy a busy environment. Yes, Imran, absolutely. So we have not only we respond differently to the environment, but we tend to like different environments based on our temperament, how we grew up, where we grew up, etc. I know for me, for example, I enjoy hustling and bustling cities, for example. Heat from the sun boosts my mood. Rain calms me down. Yes, the rain is a big one. It doesn't affect me. It can, from Klaus. All right, so these are all amazing responses as to how our bodies, are affected by the environment. Some of you mentioned the weather, the sunlight, the rain, etc. Some of you mentioned disease, right? So like catching something, or the atmosphere. Some of you mentioned the atmosphere. And there's actually a paper that I read that shows that even pollution has negative outcomes on our health and also on our mental health. So that's another thing to think about. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the theories in science that talk about how our bodies respond to the environment. One of the models that were proposed in 1991 by two scientists called Monroe and Simmons in 1991. So they are saying that, and that's also how we used to think about it. They're saying that we all have what we call vulnerability factors, right? So factors that make us vulnerable. So for example, if you inherit a gene from your parents that predisposes you to have a disease, that is a vulnerability factor, right? If you are born with an immune disorder, that is a vulnerability factor because it makes us more vulnerable to the environment, according to this theory. So they say, vulnerability factors can be physical, environmental, economic, social, demographic. They can all confer vulnerability to the environment. Now, another scientist in 1997 came in. His name is Jay Belsky. And he's saying, well, I don't think that we should call them vulnerability factors. We should call them plasticity factors. So according to Jay Belsky, he's saying it's not about whether people are born with things that are making them vulnerable or not. It's really about sensitivity. It's about how sensitive they are to the environment. So he wants to ditch that word. So to explain this, and I hope I'm explaining this clearly, please let me know if there's any questions, but this graph here, this dotted graph, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the dotted graph is showing how someone who's sensitive to the environment would respond. So if you are sensitive, if you're born with sensitivity to the environment, you're going to do really great if we put you in a positive environment, but you're not going to do so great if you're living in a negative environment. And this theory also argues that there are folks who aren't that sensitive. They have nervous systems and bodies that can very, naturally, adapt to positive or negative environments, and they won't show that sensitivity to the environment. And to make this idea clearer, I put in a picture of an orchid and a dandelion. This is a metaphor that's used a lot in developmental psychology science that I'll explain right now. So sensitive children are really these orchid kids. So again, it's not that they're vulnerable. Jay Belsky's saying, I don't think they're vulnerable. He's saying they're sensitive. So put an orchid in a really good, moist, sunlit environment, it's going to do amazing. But put this orchid in a negative environment, it's not going to do so well. Whether dandelions, on the other hand, they're going to adapt to whatever the environment is, right? So they are, it's not that they're not affected by the environment. It's just that these children that are more like dandelions are less reactive to the environment. So this is another theory that I also use in my research that kind of says that, people have different sensitivities to the environment. And for example, using the example that Imran said, they said that someone, depending on whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, they might like a, busy hustling, environment, or they can like a more naturey, calm environment. So that really also depends on how sensitive we are to the environment. So for example, if I really like nature and calm environment, and I have a sensitive nervous system, I'm not going to do well in Vermont. I'm going to do well in Manhattan, right? So that's just like one example.
And there is a question in the Q&A that says, do allergies count for the sensitivity thing? So I think they're asking, can allergies be like an external symptom of being sensitive to your environment?
That is a really good question. And I do think that, yes, I do think that allergies are a physiologic, so it is a part of our physiology, and it can make us, yes, I would think so, at least in my opinion. But, I don't study allergies, so I don't want to say anything wrong, but I do think that it does confer some sensitivity to the environment, because if you have an allergy, say to pollen, and you are in an environment that has a lot of pollen, that is going to affect your health. So that's another good example. Yeah. I can move on if there's no further questions about this.
Yeah, we're good now. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Allison. So another way that I think is super interesting, and again, I'm going to say this in like a minute or two, but actually, if you delve into this field, that is like 20 years of studying. So like you can do a whole PhD in this. So it's not my area of expertise, but I just think it's really fascinating. So epigenetics. Epi from Greek means from the outside. Genetics is the word genetics. So epigenetic really means that when the environment affects our genes. Now, this is super cool. That is another theory of how our bodies and the environment interact. Because so what we used to think, especially like given how genetics started in the 19th century, we used to think that, okay, you have a gene that says you're going to have a lot of this chemical in your body, you're doomed, you're going to have it, right? But epigenetics is saying no. So epigenetic field in biology is saying that your genes can get turned on or they can get turned off depending on the environment. So I'm going to give an example from the literature related to mental health because that's what I study. So we know that there is a gene called 5-TLLPR, if I'm not saying it correctly, and it codes for serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter in our brain that is highly related to depression. So in that case, having that gene doesn't really always mean that you will develop depression. You know, there can be environmental factors that can cause this gene to get turned off or on. On meaning that it will produce this chemical, off meaning it will not produce this chemical. So that's just another way. And again, it's a huge, huge field to delve into in biology. And it really seeps into a lot of disciplines. You can study epigenetics in psychiatry. You can study epigenetics in understanding heart disease or in understanding diabetes or in understanding so many different things because we know that genes affect everything, but really what we're saying is that it's all about how our genes interact with the environment. Okay. And I think we've talked about this before, but, you know, just some examples of negative factors in the environment, you know, could be the stressors that we all talked about. So I won't spend too much time on this, but bullying, being isolated, being exposed to social factors like discrimination or not being accepted or toxic environments, etc. Now, again, this is a question that doesn't have, you know, there's no right or wrong answers, but is it enough if your body is really stressed out due to environmental factors, is it enough to change the environment? And if not, what else would you change? So how you feel about the topic? Okay. I think we're waiting hopefully on some responses. You would want to, so Eva says, you would want to change the environment and think through and process your feelings about what used to be your environment. So like not just changing the environment, but also changing how you cope with it. That's a really good response. Because can we always change the environment? That's a good thing to think about. Oliver says no. Anna says, and your energy can change things.
I'd be
Okay.
curious, Anna, what you mean by energy. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more. Does that mean your personal energy, and when you think of what makes up your personal energy, maybe that would help us a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Imran has a really interesting perspective saying, I think changing your environment is important to do because there's always a way out of a toxic situation.
Mm-hmm.
Empowering statement.
Very empowering. Absolutely. Absolutely. Eva says you can have different ways to view stressors and make them not stressors. If you can't change your environment, try to change your view of it and find a way to cope with it. That is another really good response. What I would say is that it won't work in all situations because, again, some stressors we don't have much control over them, especially if they're big social stressors, right? So yeah. Those are all really, really good answers. Now, I'm going to go over a little bit finally some of the biological responses, other different biological responses to stress. So again, other examples of how our bodies and the environment talk to each other. The first example I'm going to give is, oops, I'm going to play this, sorry. Okay, so this is, I'm going to show you a YouTube, and I will share it right now. There's an ad. Okay, so I will try to share that. Share screen. All right, hopefully everybody can see this. And I'm going to play this. Is the sound working?
I'm not hearing it right now.
Oh, okay. Let me.
Should we try one more time checking that box?
So where do I find this box again?
Yeah, you'll have to unshare, and then as you're sharing it again, at the bottom of the window, there will be a little checkbox. I think there's two. Your computer sound.
Mm-hmm. I see that. Or maybe, I don't know if maybe it's because I have my headphones, but it's checked. So I'm going to try that again. Is that working?
I'm still not hearing
Not
it.
working. Oh. Okay, I'll try to.
Darn.
Maybe this works. Let's see.
One other thing we could do is we could put the link in the chat box, and if folks want to open another web browser, then we can come back in. It looks like 2 minutes.
That's a great idea. Yes. So I will put it in the chat box right now. I'm not an expert.
That's the Hpa axis.
Oh, we can hear it now, actually.
Oh, great. Okay,
Just heard it.
Amazing. I'll do that again. Okay. So.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA axis, is best known for its role in our body's reaction to stress. The HPA axis includes a group of hormone-secreting glands from the nervous and endocrine systems, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands. The hypothalamus is a small neuroendocrine structure situated just above the brainstem that controls the release of hormones from the pituitary gland, a hormone-secreting gland that sits just below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland can release hormones into the bloodstream to reach a variety of targets. In the case of the HPA axis, hormones released from the pituitary gland travel down to the kidneys and influence the secretion of hormones from endocrine glands called the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. The primary function of the HPA axis is to regulate the stress response. When we experience something stressful, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH. CRH signals the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, into the bloodstream. ACTH travels down to the adrenal glands where it prompts the release of a hormone called cortisol from the cortex or outer layer of the adrenal glands. The release of cortisol causes a number of changes that help the body to deal with stress. For example, it helps to mobilize energy like glucose, so the body has enough energy to cope with a prolonged stressor. When cortisol levels in the blood get high, this is sensed by receptors in areas of the brain like the hypothalamus and hippocampus, which leads to the shutting off of the stress response through what is known as a negative feedback mechanism.
Okay, so I'm gonna plug this in again. Oh, okay, so try and okay, everybody can see it. Play from current. So the main idea of this. Sorry. So the main idea of this video is really looking into, again, yet another example of how different systems in our body talk to each other. So again, there was a lot of very complicated words and different glands and hormones, but basically the main idea is that there is a conversation between the hypothalamus and the brain, a gland called the pituitary gland, also near the brain, and our kidneys. They all talk to each other. And somehow when we are dealing with stress, that's gonna lead to the release of cortisol. Now, and you know, hopefully that is gonna help the body mobilize energy to deal with the stressor. But we know that a lot of cortisol and too much cortisol in our system on a prolonged period does not have so much good effects on our health. So that's, again, one example of how our bodies also talk to the environment. Another example is also another biological example from the nervous system. And I'm not sure how much folks are familiar with it, but I'm going to try to explain it as quickly as possible. We have a branch of our nervous system that's called the autonomic nervous system. Now, when you breathe, when your heart beats, when you digest, these are not things that you consciously control. So and who does them? The autonomic nervous system is responsible for all of these functions, right? So the autonomic nervous system is that branch of your nervous system. You can see here there's the spinal cord and all of these nerves coming from the spinal cord, tying the spinal cord to different organs. And that part of our nervous system is doing all of those really cool functions that we really do not consciously control. That part of the nervous system is divided into two branches. We have a branch that's called parasympathetic and another branch that's called sympathetic. Now, what the parasympathetic nervous system does is that it's always active when we are rested, when we are in a very calm state. So we call this the rest and digest state. In that state, the parasympathetic nervous system is allowing your digestion to happen, is allowing your heart rate to be kind of slow and nice, not too fast, is allowing your pupils to be constricted, your breathing to be stable, etc. Now, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in when there's danger in the environment, right? And we call this a fight or flight response. So say like a stressor happens in the environment, you hear a startling noise and you get so stressed out, your heart's going to beat faster, your sweat glands are going to start secreting sweat, you might breathe faster, etc. So those are all biological reactions that you do not control, that that autonomic part of your nervous system is controlling. And then having your sympathetic nervous system active for so long, if stress is prolonged, is also not so good for our health. Which is why when folks do, more relaxing activities, such as, I don't know, yoga or exercise or running, that really helps to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. It helps us relax. It helps us feel more stable and in balance. And then finally, this is just an example from neuroscience on how, you know, our everything is interrelated. Everything in our bodies is responding to the environment. This is an Fmri example. And just to give you an example, an Fmri stands for Functional Magnetic Resonance Imaging. It's a type of imaging that's used in the medical field. I put in this picture just so that you can see how strong it is. It's a big magnet in which people sit in. So people tend to go in an Fmri if someone needs a brain scan. It's such a strong magnet. As you can see here, the wheelchair, if you put a wheelchair next to it, it will just really go and attach to it. So you can't wear any metals if you go inside of it. There are a lot of Fmri machines at UVM Medical Center. And there are studies that looked at how brain activation is different for different folks. And we know that during stress, if someone is using more resilient coping, different areas of their brain are active versus someone who isn't. That was a study done at Yale University that shows that even our brains respond differently to the environment, also depending on factors that are individual. That is all for me today. I kind of hopefully gave you a general overview of this very complex and intricate relationship between our bodies, our minds, and the environment, how they all interact and they're constantly talking to each other. And I want to ask, are there any questions or, you know, things we can discuss, hopefully?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I made it back for the end. I bummed I missed most of this, but before we get to the questions, I'm going to launch a poll. We just always like to get your feedback. So I just launched it. If for some reason you don't see the poll, just put your answers in the chat. And while we're doing this, there are some questions in the Q&A, but if you're thinking of any questions you want to ask, get them into the Q&A and we'll make sure they get asked. But first, we'll do the poll and then we'll get to the questions. And Oliver, if you don't see it, so what we're asking, if you don't see the poll, we want you to just rate the overall cafe today, 1 to 5, 5 being the best. And most importantly, we want to know knowledge gain. So 1 to 5, 5 meaning you learned a lot today. So we're just trying to get some feedback. We'll keep the poll open just a little bit longer. Want to get a couple more responses here. And again, get your questions into the Q&A. All right, I'm going to give the poll 10 more seconds. If you haven't voted yet, please do. All right, so let's get to your questions. I see a bunch have already been asked, but let's see what we got here. Are there any creatures that do not feel stress? Ooh, interesting question.
Wow, that is such an interesting question. And my answer to that would be the way we think about stress, especially in this field of that really relates to neuroscience and clinical psychology, is very based on the nervous system. So if an animal, apparently there are animals, not animals, but like creatures that don't have a nervous system. And we can argue that if a creature doesn't have a nervous system, then it cannot experience stress from that standpoint. But remember Celia's definition, Celia defined it as stress is considered as literally anything that causes a shift in the balance of an organism, right? So if you're taking Celia's definition, then yes. If you're using a clinical psychology or neuroscience definition, then maybe no. So really depending on where you're seeing it.
The next question, can the genes be turned on after a while?
That is such a good question. And the short answer is, and did that mean when I talked about epigenetics, so like genes? Okay, so the idea is that yes, the idea from, oh, I don't know what I did. The idea from epigenetics is that we used to think that our genes code for something and that's it. But what epigenetics is saying is that they can go on and off depending on the shifts in the environment. So yeah, they can get turned on in an environment and then turned off in a totally different environment.
environment. It's a very complex conversation between our DNA and the environment.
Next question, can people be born with depression?
Wow, that is such a that is
Yeah.
such a really, wow, a really good question. There has been in the literature that I know of some evidence that there is a genetic factor that goes into mental health outcomes. So schizophrenia is one of them. I remember reading this, it was on the New York Times. It made a very big, it made the front page of the New York Times because there was a paper that showed that you can inherit it. There is a genetic component basically to everything, right? But having a gene that predisposes you for depression doesn't mean that you will develop it. Again, it's really related as to how sensitive you are and which environment you're currently in. Can someone be born with depression? That is something that I would say the field is definitely trying to answer still, because there are a lot of, just from a clinical psychology standpoint, there's a lot of problems in trying to diagnose depression in children. So clinical psychologists themselves are still trying to figure out, what does depression look like for a child? Again, a child doesn't always talk to you. So how would you know how they're feeling, right? It's easier to talk to an adult who can tell you, I'm losing interest, I don't feel like doing things, I feel depressed, versus a nonverbal creature that is a baby. How does depression manifest there? That is a question that we're still trying to answer, I think.
And Anna wants to know, do hormones contribute to stress?
Absolutely, yes. So absolutely. I don't know if from the Hpa Axis video, cortisol is considered a hormone. So that's just one example of how a hormone can also play a role in that conversation between stressor and the environment.
And then can you get depression from continued stress?
Absolutely, yes. So we do know that continued prolonged toxic stress will lead to different mental health outcomes, such as depression and anxiety. And again, every person will react differently, right? So if you put two different people in the same environment, one of them might develop depression or anxiety, the other might not. Really, and that depends on that person's biological makeup.
And so Lily wants to know, what are some negative effects from stress on your health besides depression?
Right. So yes, it could cause a variety of things. Like it can cause stress on the body. It could cause